A young woman is found dead inside the trash compactor of a luxury apartment building in Melbourne. The scene is disturbing, but what's even more chilling is that nobody knows exactly how she ended up there. Was it a tragic accident, or is there something much darker hidden behind this case? Today, you'll uncover the intriguing and mysterious story behind the death of Phoebe Handsjuk, an investigation filled with controversy, conflicting evidence, and shocking details that never made sense to police or her family. Get ready, because by the end of this video, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about what really happened on that tragic day. Phoebe Handsjuk was the kind of woman who drew attention wherever she went. Born in Melbourne, Australia, on May 9, 1986, Phoebe was just 24 years old when her life came to a tragic and mysterious end. Young, vibrant, and full of life, she was known among friends and family for her magnetic personality, engaging charisma, and the adventurous, free spirit that captivated everyone who knew her. From a young age, Phoebe showed herself to be restless, impulsive, and deeply creative. Her parents, Natalie and Len Handsjuk, often spoke about the intensity with which Phoebe lived each day. She loved writing poetry, playing sports, and was profoundly passionate about art and music, using these activities as outlets to express the complexity of her emotions and inner thoughts. Phoebe possessed an exotic beauty and a captivating smile, but what truly set her apart was the depth of her inner world, constantly seeking new meanings and experiences. Despite her outward joy, Phoebe also battled internal demons. Her family and close friends often remarked that she could swing rapidly between moments of extreme happiness and deep melancholy. Her intense personality drew many people into her social circle, but also led to complicated, sometimes turbulent relationships. One of these relationships was with Anthony "Ant" Hampel, her boyfriend at the time, who was 16 years older, successful, wealthy, and influential in Australia's events and entertainment scene. Their relationship, described by many friends as passionate yet volatile, quickly became one of the central elements of Phoebe's life, bringing not only happy moments, but also a heavy emotional burden. Close friends noted that despite the glamour and apparent happiness, Phoebe increasingly showed signs of stress and anxiety, which only deepened the mystery surrounding her death. An especially intriguing detail that immediately generates empathy from the audience is Phoebe's personal diary, where she frequently wrote about her insecurities, dreams, and internal conflicts, providing an intimate and vulnerable look into her mind. This diary, discovered after her death, revealed a young woman desperately searching for balance, understanding, and acceptance in a world that often seemed incomprehensible to her. Phoebe also maintained extremely close ties with her family, especially her grandmother, Jeanette Campbell, with whom she shared a deep and emotional bond. Jeanette became one of the primary voices, tirelessly questioning the circumstances surrounding Phoebe's death, raising troubling questions that disturb authorities and led the public to deeply consider whether something dark lay hidden behind this tragedy. Phoebe Handsjuk, therefore, was not just another anonymous victim of a disturbing crime. She was a vibrant, complex, and deeply human woman whose circumstances of death never matched the intensity with which she lived her brief life. As we explore her story, we feel the pain of loss, empathy for her relentless pursuit of happiness, and outrage over the injustice of the unresolved mystery surrounding her premature and inexplicable end. It was a seemingly ordinary Thursday, December 2nd, 2010, at the luxurious Balenciaga apartment building in Melbourne. Phoebe Handsjuk had spent the previous night in her 12th floor apartment, the one she shared with her boyfriend, Anthony Hampel. In the early hours of the day, everything appeared to be normal, or at least that's what it seemed on the surface. Around 11 a.m., security footage showed Phoebe leaving the building wearing athletic clothes, appearing somewhat agitated. A few hours later, she returned. What happened in the hours that followed remains a disturbing and disconnected series of events that would end with the discovery of her body in circumstances that, to this day, defy logic. At 7 p.m., a building maintenance worker encountered a grotesque scene in the garbage disposal room on the ground floor. shards of glass scattered across the floor, blood near the compactor area, and Phoebe Handsjuk's body. She was partially inside the building's garbage compactor, with her feet still caught in the machine. The impact of this discovery shocked everyone involved, including the seasoned paramedics who arrived minutes later. It was a scene more fitting for a horror movie than the reality of an upscale residential tower. Now stop and think. How could a healthy 24-year-old woman have fallen down a narrow, dark garbage chute from over 12 stories up and survived the fall long enough to still be conscious and attempting to escape before being crushed by an industrial compactor? That is the first of many questions that turned Phoebe's death into a national mystery. A 30-meter fall should have caused instant fatal fractures. Yet, the autopsy revealed she hadn't died from the fall, but from the injuries inflicted by the compactor. Most disturbingly, her body showed deep lacerations and crushed bones at her legs, but very few injuries to her head or torso, something that didn't make sense for such a massive fall. And there's more. The door to the garbage chute, located in a maintenance room near Phoebe's apartment, required strength and some knowledge to open. It was a narrow entryway, about 45 centimeters wide, designed for garbage bags, not an adult human body. Forensic investigators concluded it would have been extremely difficult, if not impossible, for someone to enter it alone, especially voluntarily. To make things worse, no fingerprints were found on the chute door, not even Phoebe's. This raised an even more disturbing possibility. If she didn't go in alone, who put her there and why? The building's security cameras, installed in several key areas, mysteriously failed to capture any useful footage during the most critical moments. Several segments were out of focus or simply recorded nothing relevant. The elevators didn't show Phoebe going down. No resident reported screams or strange noises. No one saw anything suspicious. It was as if time itself had folded to conceal the truth. Phoebe Handsjuk didn't vanish into the woods or go missing on a remote highway. She died inside a luxury apartment building, surrounded by neighbors, security, cameras, and modern technology. And yet, no one saw anything. No one heard anything. And to this day, no one has explained with certainty what truly happened during that silent December afternoon. If the scene of Phoebe Handsjuk's death already seemed like something out of a nightmare, the developments in the investigation turned the case into a true maze of unanswered questions, ignored evidence, and, at the very least, suspicious behavior. From the beginning, one would expect that such a bizarre and disturbing case would be investigated with the utmost rigor. But the reality was quite the opposite. The rush to classify her death as an accident was the first red flag. Authorities seemed more interested in closing the case quickly than uncovering the truth. Let's start with the ignored evidence. At the location where her body was found, there were shards of glass and blood on the floor. Apparently, Phoebe had broken a glass before the fall, but no one could explain how that glass ended up in the trash room on the ground floor when her apartment was on the 12th. Furthermore, the fragments didn't match any glassware found in her home. Was it broken in a desperate attempt to escape, or was it planted there? Even stranger, there were no compatible cuts on her hands to suggest she had shattered the glass herself. And the fingerprints? They were non-existent. The garbage chute door had no fingerprints, not even Phoebe's. That's statistically improbable. We all leave traces with our hands, especially on a steel door that requires effort to open. How could someone open it, enter, and vanish without leaving a single mark? Moreover, no in-depth forensic analysis was done on Phoebe's apartment. No luminol tests were conducted to detect hidden bloodstains. The scene was released quickly, even before full forensic work was done. The investigation acted as though everything was clear, when, in fact, everything was shrouded in mystery. The security cameras, which could have been the key to solving the case, were a disaster. Some weren't working. Others mysteriously failed to capture anything useful. There is no footage showing Phoebe entering the room where the chute is located. There is also no footage of any suspicious individual in the building. We are left with a time gap in which simply nothing was recorded. A convenient blind spot for anyone searching for the truth. Now let's talk about the behavior of those closest to Phoebe, especially Anthony Hampel, her boyfriend at the time. Ant was a powerful man, an event producer with connections across media and politics. On the day of Phoebe's death, Ant claimed he wasn't home when it happened. He said he arrived at the apartment around 6 p.m. and spent about an hour casually browsing the internet before being informed by emergency services of the tragedy. But there are gaps in this version. Ant claimed he wasn't concerned when he came home and Phoebe wasn't there. Even though the apartment door was unlocked, her handbag was left on the couch, and their dog was hungry, as if left alone all day. No call, no message, no sign of searching. He just assumed she wasn't around. Who lives with a partner, comes home to that, and doesn't feel something is off. Even more disturbing, his tone and demeanor during police interviews struck many as cold and detached. There was no visible grief, no shock. He even hired a lawyer immediately after Phoebe's death, which isn't a crime, of course, but it's also not the most common behavior of someone in mourning, especially if they claim to have nothing to hide. Another red flag, just days before her death, Phoebe reportedly told family she wanted to leave the relationship. She felt trapped, pressured, and ready for a fresh start. In her personal diary, found after the tragedy, she wrote of confusion, emotional entrapment, and a clear desire for change, which raises an unsettling question. Did someone have a reason to silence her? Even the investigators themselves, over time, discreetly admitted that mistakes were made. The lack of full testing, the rushed case closure, the absence of thorough questioning of those close to her, and the decision not to treat her death as suspicious from the start. All of it crippled the investigation. Instead of diving deep into the contradictory and abnormal aspects of the case, the authorities chose a convenient narrative. Phoebe was under the influence of alcohol and medication, had a breakdown, and entered the chute herself. But this explanation was never accepted by her family. And frankly, it doesn't convince anyone who closely examines the facts. When you add up the ignored evidence, the glaring investigative failures, and the cold behavior of people who should have been devastated, one disturbing truth starts to emerge. Someone may have benefited from Phoebe's silence. And in that silence may lie one of the most unjustly buried stories in Australia's criminal history. Amid the storm of unanswered questions, one name consistently stands at the center of the mystery: Anthony Hampel, known as Ant. A well-known event producer in Melbourne, Ant wasn't just Phoebe Handsjuk's boyfriend. He was an influential man with powerful connections across Australia's artistic, political, and legal spheres. And that's precisely why he became one of the most controversial and scrutinized figures in the investigation. Phoebe and Ant began their relationship when she was just 23 years old, and he was already 39. The 16-year age difference didn't go unnoticed by friends and family, but at first, it seemed like just a generational gap. What no one could have foreseen was how intense and unstable the relationship would become over time. Close friends described the couple's dynamic as marked by extremes. Moments of deep affection followed by waves of emotional tension. Phoebe, with her free spirit and sensitivity, often felt suffocated by Ant's expectations and lifestyle. Ant, on the other hand, was known for being controlling, reserved, and calculated. Behind the scenes of the investigation, Ant Hampel's name quickly shifted from being a romantic footnote to a central piece of the puzzle. The coldness with which he reacted to Phoebe's death was the first major red flag. According to reports, when informed of her death, Ant showed little to no emotion. He didn't cry, he didn't panic, and more curiously, he called his lawyer immediately, even before contacting Phoebe's parents. Atypical behavior, especially from someone living with the victim and claiming to be in a serious relationship. In the days that followed, Ant remained distant from the media and Phoebe's family. He did not attend her funeral. He didn't accompany her parents to the police. He offered no emotional support. To many, he seemed completely detached, as if none of it concerned him. This attitude, paired with his social influence, sparked growing suspicion. Was he being protected by his network of connections? That suspicion deepens when you consider Ant Hampel's family background. His father, George Hampel, is a former judge of the Supreme Court of Victoria a highly respected figure in the Australian legal world. His stepmother, Felicity Hample, is also a judge and a human rights advocate. In other words, Ant wasn't an ordinary citizen. He was part of one of the most respected and connected families in Australia's judicial system. That level of influence triggered immediate concerns. Many began to wonder, was the investigation truly impartial? Or was it softened to protect the image of a powerful family? It's impossible to ignore that. From the start, police seemed unusually eager to classify the case as an accident, even in the face of countless inconsistencies. At no point was Ant treated as a suspect or interrogated thoroughly. He was asked only a few surface-level questions in brief, informal interviews with no real investigative pressure applied. Phoebe's own family reported that they were denied full access to the case early on. They said they felt sidelined at every step, as if they were battling an invisible force determined to sweep everything under the rug, as if silence was more convenient than truth. Officially, of course, none of this can be proven, but influence doesn't have to be overt to be effective. Sometimes, all it takes is a last name, a phone call, a whispered word behind closed doors, and the machinery of justice begins to slow down. When someone like Ant Hample is involved, the scales of justice can tilt before anyone even notices. To many, this explosive combination of cold behavior, convenient silence, and powerful family ties turned Ant Hample from boyfriend to a central figure in the mystery. A man cloaked in shadows, whose presence, though never formally accused, continues to loom over the case like a heavy cloud, fueling doubt, outrage, and the growing sense that the truth is still being buried by invisible hands. In the face of such an unusual and poorly explained death, the official silence gave way to countless theories. Some attempt to fill the gaps left by the investigation. Others arise from indignation, grief, and the pursuit of justice. Among them, 3 theories stand out: the improbable accident theory, the suicide theory contested by the family, and the homicide theory involving people close to Phoebe. The improbable accident theory. This was the version adopted by authorities shortly after Phoebe's body was discovered. According to this theory, Phoebe, under the influence of alcohol and medication, was in an altered state of consciousness and somehow entered the garbage chute on her own, not fully understanding what she was doing. She then either slipped or launched herself by mistake, fell over 12 stories, and was fatally injured by the compactor. Strengths of this theory. Toxicology tests confirmed the presence of alcohol and prescription drugs in Phoebe's system, indicating she was indeed under some level of influence. Her history of impulsive behavior and previous incidents of self-harm support the idea that she may have acted recklessly. Weaknesses. The logic of this theory challenges common sense. The chute door was heavy, narrow, and required physical strength and coordination to open. It was designed for garbage bags, not people. No fingerprints belonging to Phoebe were found on the chute door, which seriously undermines the idea that she opened it herself. The police quickly closed the case without examining crucial forensic details, raising doubts about the validity of this conclusion. Is this theory possible? Technically, yes, but it's also extremely unlikely, and, above all, far too convenient. The suicide theory, contested by the family. The second theory suggests that Phoebe may have taken her own life. She was in a fragile emotional state on antidepressants and had a history of anxiety and instability. This theory proposes that, in a moment of overwhelming despair, she chose to end her life in an unconventional way. Strengths of this theory. Phoebe's emotional struggles were real. Her diaries revealed moments of deep psychological distress, feelings of inadequacy, and existential crisis. Some witnesses claimed Phoebe seemed lost in the weeks before her death, and she had written about wanting to disappear from the world. Weaknesses. Her family, who knew her best, has always vehemently rejected this theory. They believe she was starting to rebuild her life, pulling away from Ant, and looking for a fresh start. The method is highly unusual. Most suicide cases involve more accessible and less physically demanding means. The effort required to climb into that narrow space is massive and inconsistent with someone mentally and physically impaired by substances. Furthermore, her diary entries, while reflecting pain, also expressed hope. Her writing was that of a conflicted person, not necessarily someone who had decided to die. This lends weight to the family's belief that the suicide narrative was used to conveniently close an uncomfortable case. The most controversial, and to many, the most plausible theory is that Phoebe did not die alone. She was murdered, or at the very least, coerced into entering the garbage chute by someone close to her. The signs point to something darker, a crime carried out with cold precision and quietly covered up. Strengths of this theory. The complete absence of fingerprints on the chute door strongly suggests the scene was cleaned, something typical in homicide cases. The cold, detached behavior of people close to Phoebe, particularly her boyfriend, Aunt Hampel, who isolated himself and showed little emotion, raises serious red flags. The failure of security cameras, which inexplicably didn't capture key moments, hints at potential manipulation or purposeful omission. The Hampel family's powerful connections in the legal system are seen by many as a possible obstacle to an unbiased investigation. Weaknesses. There are no eyewitnesses or direct physical evidence proving foul play. The case was closed without any injuries on the body that definitively confirmed homicide. To this day, no one has been formally charged or officially named a suspect. Still, it's hard to ignore the web of suspicious details that, when taken together, suggest Phoebe may have been the victim of something more sinister. Perhaps a heated argument that turned violent. A push. A desperate cover-up. This theory may lack hard evidence, but it has the highest number of unanswered questions. In the end, none of the theories fully resolve the mystery. And that, in itself, is the greatest problem. A case with so many loose ends should never be closed based on a weak hypothesis. When truth becomes more painful than lies, the system often chooses the path of least resistance. And that's why, to this day, the death of Phoebe Handsjuk continues to echo, not as a mere tragedy, but as a cry for justice never served. Phoebe's story has become the subject of lectures, academic theses, feminist activism, and national discussions about the Australian legal system. Many women, upon learning about the case, felt a deep connection to the experience of abandonment, invisibility, and being trapped in stifling relationships with no institutional support. Tragically, Phoebe's case became a mirror for thousands of silent tragedies that happen every day, ones that never make the news simply because they don't end as brutally or involve a family willing to fight endlessly. The fight for justice for Phoebe Handsjuk has long surpassed the boundaries of an individual case. It has become a movement of resistance against forgetting, against invisible privilege, and against the convenience of official narratives. Her name now represents not just a young woman who died under suspicious circumstances, but an entire generation that demands answers, truth, and justice, even if it takes decades to get there. After so many facts, theories, suspicions, and revelations, one undeniable truth remains. The case of Phoebe Handsjuk is still far from being fully understood. And perhaps what disturbs the most, what cuts the deepest, is not just the brutal death of a vibrant young woman, but the deafening silence that followed. There are questions that scream, that burn, that gnaw at our collective conscience because they still haven't been answered. The first is this: why were there no fingerprints or blood on the garbage chute door? Phoebe would have had to open the door, lean in, support herself, crawl. Yet not a single physical trace was found. Not one fingerprint, no smudge, no blood or scratches on the metal. It's as if she vanished into thin air, as if the scene had been cleaned. But cleaned by whom? Another obvious and deeply unsettling question. Why did the cameras fail at the most critical times? In a luxury building filled with surveillance equipment, there wasn't a single recording of Phoebe entering the garbage room. No footage of suspicious movements. No logs of who entered or exited her floor during the crucial time window. Coincidence? Or convenience? Worse yet, why weren't these recordings reviewed immediately? Why was some of the footage analyzed too late, or simply dismissed by the investigation? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, why wasn't Phoebe's boyfriend, Anthony Hample, investigated more thoroughly? He was the last person to see her alive. He lived with her. Their relationship was known to be emotionally turbulent. He knew about her mental state and her recent distress. And yet, he was never properly questioned. He wasn't treated as a suspect. His alibi wasn't rigorously tested. His behavior wasn't professionally analyzed. He was simply spared. But spared by whom and why? Did his influence, as the son of a former Supreme Court judge and stepson of a sitting judge, outweigh the need for truth? Was there a quiet, subtle, but powerful effort to close the case before it became too inconvenient? More questions linger, like unhealed wounds. Why didn't the forensic team use luminol in the apartment to detect possible traces of blood? Why wasn't the chute door tested with someone of similar build and weight to Phoebe to assess the plausibility of her entering it alone? Why didn't the broken glass near the body match anything from her kitchen? Why did the investigation ignore the fact that Phoebe had been trying to rebuild her life, leave the relationship, and start over? These aren't questions born of idle curiosity. They are the questions of an entire country that followed this case with disbelief and outrage. They are the questions of a family who, over a decade later, still wakes up every day carrying the weight of not knowing and the pain of realizing that maybe no one ever truly wanted to know. In the end, the case of Phoebe Handsjuk is more than a mystery. It's a brutal portrait of how silence can be constructed layer by layer, with bureaucracy, convenience, and power. And until these questions are answered with honesty, justice, and courage, Phoebe will not be forgotten. Not as a body buried, but as a flame burning in the eyes of everyone who refuses to let her story fade. Phoebe Handsjuk's story is one that doesn't leave your mind or your heart, because it's not just the story of an unexplained death. It's the story of a young woman full of life, of art, of intensity, of a woman who was silenced in a brutal way, and perhaps far too definitively to be called coincidence. The case remains officially closed, archived, labeled an accident, but the facts, the flaws, and the open wounds suggest something else entirely. They tell us that there are questions that were never answered, that there were voices that were never heard, that there was haste where there should have been caution, coldness where there should have been empathy, superficiality where there should have been rigorous investigation. To this day, no reopening has been authorized, no new forensic analysis has been conducted, no overlooked testimonies have been revisited, and still, the sense that something is profoundly wrong lingers in everyone who knows this story. Perhaps we will never know for sure what truly happened on that afternoon of December 2nd, 2010. But one thing is clear. This case still cries out for justice. It still cries out for answers. And now, I want to hear from you. What do you believe really happened to Phoebe Handsjuk? Do you think it was an improbable accident? A misunderstood suicide? Or a crime carefully erased by those behind scenes? Leave your comment below. Your voice might help keep this story alive. It might help increase pressure for justice. It might prove that no matter how hard someone tries to silence the truth, there will always be those who refuse to forget. If you made it this far, it's because this story touched you somehow. So I invite you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, share this video with someone you care about. Because what happened to Phoebe cannot be just another forgotten case. She deserves more than that. She deserves to be remembered. And above all, she deserves justice.